On my way home, December 1st, 1955, about 6 o'clock in the afternoon, I boarded the bus downtown Montgomery on Coach Square. As the bus proceeded out of town, on the third stop, the white passengers had filled the front of the bus. When I got on the bus, the rear was filled with colored passengers, and they were beginning to stand. The seat I occupied was the first of the seats where the Negro passengers take on this route. The driver noted that the front of the bus was filled with white passengers, and there would be 2 or 3 men standing. He looked back and asked that the seat where I had taken on this route. The driver noted that the front of the bus was filled with white passengers, and there would be 2 or 3 men standing. He looked back and asked that the seat where I had taken on this route. The driver noted that the front of the bus was filled with white passengers, and there would be 2 or 3 men standing. There would be 2 or 3 men standing. He looked back and asked that the seat where I had taken on this route. The driver noted that the front of the bus was filled with white passengers, and there would be 2 or 3 men standing. There would be 2 or 3 men standing. He looked back and asked that the seat where I had on this route. The driver noted that the front of the bus was filled with white passengers, and there would be 2 or 3 men standing. There would be 2 or 3 men standing. He looked back and asked that the seat where I had on this route. The driver noted that the front of the bus was filled with white passengers, and there would be 2 or 3 men standing. There would be 2 or 3 men standing. He looked back and asked that the seat where I had on this route. The driver noted that the front of the bus was filled with white passengers, and there would be 2 or 3 men standing. There would be 2 or 3 men standing. He looked back and asked that the seat where I had on this route. The driver noted that the front of the bus was filled with white passengers, and
Hey, Andre.
Are you fixing it right now?
Yeah, I think we got it.
Okay, great.
How you doing? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, great.
But I'm gonna exit and come back because like all the walls are blank.
Okay, sounds good.
Taken along with three other persons, one in the seat with me, and two across the aisle was seated. He demanded the seat that we were occupying. The other passengers very reluctantly gave up their seats, but I refused to do so. I want to make very certain that it is understood that I had not taken a seat in the white section, as has been reported in many cases. An article came out in the newspaper on Friday morning about the Negro woman overlooked segregation. She was seated in the front seat, the white section of the bus, and refused to take a seat in the rear of the bus. That was the first newspaper account. The seat where I occupied we were in the custom of taking this seat on the way home, even though at times on the same bus route we occupied the same seat with white standing if their space had been taken up, the seat had been taken up. I was very much surprised that the driver at this point demanded that I remove myself from the seat. The driver said that if I refused to leave the seat, he would have to call the police, and I told him just call the police. He then called the officers of the law. They came and placed me under arrest. Violation of the segregation law of the city and state of Alabama transportation. I didn't think I was violating any. I felt that I was not being treated right and that I had a right to retain the seat that I had taken as a passenger on the bus. The time had just come when I had been pushed as far as I could stand to be pushed, I suppose. They placed me under arrest. And well, I wasn't afraid. I don't know. I wasn't, but I didn't feel afraid. I had decided that I would have to know once and for all what rights I had as a human being and a citizen, even in Montgomery, Alabama. And I was bailed out shortly after the arrest. The trial was held December 5th on the next Monday, and the protest began from that day, and it is still continuing. And so the case was appealed. From the time of the arrest on Thursday night, Friday and Saturday and Sunday, the word had gotten around over Montgomery of my arrest because of this incident. There were telephone calls from those who knew about it to others. The ministers were very much interested in it, and we had our meetings in the churches. And being the minority, we felt that nothing could be gained by violence or threat or belligerent attitude. We believe that more could be accomplished through the nonviolent passive resistance. And people just began to decide that they wouldn't ride the bus on the day of my trial, which was Monday, December 5th. Monday morning, when the buses were out on the regular run, they remained empty. People were walking or getting rides in cars as people would pick them up as best they could. On Monday night, the mass meeting at the Hope Street Baptist Church had been called, and there were many thousand people there. They kept coming, and some people never did get in the church. There were so many. I was not the only person who had been mistreated and humiliated. I have been refused the entrance on the buses because I would not pay my fare at the front and go around to the rear door to enter. That was the custom if the bus was crowded up to the point where the white passengers would start occupying. I hadn't thought that I would be the person to do this. It hadn't occurred to me. Others had gone through the same experience, some even worse experience than mine, and they all felt that the time had come that they should decide that we would have to stop supporting the bus company until we were given better service. And the first day of remaining off the bus had been so successful. It was organized in that we wouldn't ride the bus until our request had been granted. We didn't know just what to expect. In our area, we always try to avoid trouble and be as careful as possible to stay out of trouble among us. We had no quarrel with anyone. We only want to stop riding the buses until we treated as any other passenger. Children of the world, all over the world, little boys and girls, we need you. There's no one else to go to. You hold the world. I want you to understand. You got a weight on your shoulder. I'm gonna need a loving hand. Hold my hand with you as I'm coming on the man. The world is dying every day. Show us the way, yeah. You're a star in my eyes, yeah. The future.
All right, welcome to summer school. If you're watching this live or you are participating in the chat or you are in the space, want to welcome you to 228 Accelerator Summer School. We're going to start with the breathing exercise after all that hyped up dancing. So wherever you are, however you are, sit or stand as you're able, with your feet firmly grounded on the floor. Imagine that the balls of your feet are extending from your body, deeply rooted in the earth. Relax your shoulders, swallow a couple of times, and close your eyes. We'll breathe in by our nose, out of our mouths, always using our throats for this breathing exercise. Breathe in as long as possible. Breathe in as slowly as possible, and breathe in as deeply as possible. Let's breathe together. Inhale, breathing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold it. And exhale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Release. Inhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Full lungs. And exhale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Release. The deepest breath of the day. We're taking it together, connected to the people on this call and the communities that we serve and love. Inhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold it. And exhale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Release. Open up your eyes. Come back to center. Dre, welcome. How did that feel today?
I really needed that, especially like literally 30 minutes ago. Got the news about the Supreme Court affirmative action. And so I needed that breath.
I haven't gotten the news about Supreme Court affirmative action, but if needing a breath is what you needed, then I can probably anticipate what the ruling was.
Correct.
All right. Well, we start with breathing for these moments to remind ourselves that even when times seem darkest, that we are still dynamic beings. We can still grow and we can still move, which is the purpose of this summer school. Summer school is designed to create a space for us to be the community and imagine the community that we want. At the 228 Accelerator and all of our partners, including House of Legends, we are in the business of creating what we like to call a multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy. And that means bringing people together, modeling new ways of being together, talking about things so that we can be the people that we want. We can live the future that we want today. We're going to start with connections, and connections will do that a little bit differently today. We're going to put a little bit of music on so that you can hear it and take a walk around the metaverse space, looking at the quotes that are on the wall, the images that are around. And we'll do this just for a little bit. When the music stops, we'll ask that you come back. Jay, I'm just talking to you. And then we can talk about what is coming up for you now after you're looking at the images on the wall, what's the trees are rooted in. And then we'll jump into the actual artifact of the day, Martin Luther King's future goals of the civil rights movement. Does that sound good?
Yes.
Awesome. So I'm going to put some music on. Let's take a walk around the Metaverse House, see the quotes, and reflect on what is coming up for us as we are looking at the quotes. Music is on now.
I commit to the healing, I see my fears fade away. There's no denying the beauty when a gift from the heart finds its way. That's why I live, it's who I am. I gotta give, gotta love, touch one soul. Raise my voice, sing it loud. Say the words, I am here. Touch one soul, touch one soul, yeah. Touch one soul, touch one soul, touch one soul, touch one soul. Touch one soul, touch one soul, touch one soul. One touch, just one touch, just one touch, just one touch. Touch one soul, one soul, just one touch. Touch one soul, touch one soul, one soul, touch one soul. Touch one soul, one soul, one soul, one soul. It's who I am. I gotta give, gotta love. Touch one soul. Raise my voice, sing it loud. Say the words, I'm here. Touch one soul. Touch one soul. Touch one. Touch one. Touch one soul. Touch one. Touch one. Just touch one soul. Touch one. Touch one. Touch one soul. Touch one. Touch one.
All right, let's come on back to the front room. And let's open up connections for a minute. We'll be here for just a few minutes. Dre, any quote, like what's coming up for you as you're holding the Supreme Court verdict in your space? Hold on, I left the house for a second. There we go. You're holding the Supreme Court verdict in your heart right now. First of all, tell us what you understand, and then we'll just open it up for connections because that's really important.
Oh, about the decision?
Yeah, because I didn't see it yet.
Okay, so ruled 6-3 that Harvard and UNC cannot use race-based admissions in their admissions process. However, when I was listening to a little bit about the dissent, they were talking about how doesn't mean that you can't take into consideration someone's life, and if someone talks about how race has played a role in the challenges of their life. And I just think the semantics and things matter. And it's just really disappointing that was the verdict. I mean, I tried to be a little bit more optimistic about it. But yeah, that's what I've read so far.
I need to have some time for that to sink in for a second. When you think about that verdict and the quotes that you saw on the wall, what came up for you?
At first, like as I was going through all this stuff on the wall, and I saw some quotes that we had talked about last week, and I see a lot of the work that we've done in the metaverse.
Mm-hmm.
And I see words like imagination, connection, radical imagination, and even like that we're doing, and the conversations that we're having, because they're extremely important. But at the same time, like with this work, and I think about again, like the decision that was today, and all the things that are coming up in our world and our society, and all the decisions that have yet to be made, or are going to need to be made, like how much our world, or how much we as a people need to make these connections and imagine something different. I think it's like, I mean, it's been time for that, but it just reemphasizes that work.
Yeah. I need to read The Descent, but my immediate reactions, I think about, like, I get the intent, but I think the impact could be devastating. No, the impact will be devastating. And it is also like negating, again, I need to read this Descent, but all the ways that the intelligence in our bodies, right? Like, I think a certain way because I'm in a black female queer body. I move a certain way. Like all of those things are a part of my intelligence. So in the same way for everybody else. So to not see that as a space of intelligence is, it's erasure. It's like, oh, there's like learning that I cannot bring to the table that's not even wanted.
Right. And it's just like, it's I just think about like access and opportunity. And I also too need to finish going through and reading the different articles in Descent as well. But like in terms of access and opportunity in this country, like I sometimes like having a full understanding of the perspectives as well, I think is necessary. And I just feel like people don't, take into consideration other people's experience. I was just reading a tweet from somebody, I think I read him in grad school, and he talks about like how race neutral admissions doesn't exist. And I'm just like, hello.
Well, exactly.
So it's just like, I feel like, naming things, like I feel like the language and the words, like again, like they matter. And it'll be interesting. I also need to read The Descent. I don't want to like make any judgments about reading the full Descent, but it's sad.
Yeah, I think very clearly about my own college journey and admissions journey, and it was very important to my father, who lived in Virginia, and couldn't go to the University of Virginia, right? So he was like, I will send my children there. Like it was a big deal. And and because of race. Right? And to know that there are white children who were able to go to, whether it was Princeton or Harvard or Virginia or Chapel Hill, because of race. And it's like, to deny opportunity, it just doesn't make sense. It's like, of course race is used. It's always been used. It's the marginalizing agent in our whole American experience.
Right.
So it's
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's almost as if that decision could make sense if we lived in the world where there was no poverty. and that poverty, like I was listening to um Reverend Bishop William Barber. He was like, poverty is the fourth leading killer in the United States after heart disease, after cancer, and after smoking related. So because class and race are so tightly coupled, more people, the people who are living sicker and dying younger, are people of color, black and brown folks, because of poverty.
Right.
Now, in terms of numbers, you have a lot of white poor folk, but it's almost as if the ruling, again, I need to read the dissent, is saying like, oh, the playing field, everyone has the same opportunities, the same resources. So we don't have, because we don't want this to be a factor, we can just take it away. It's like, no, it still is a factor.
Right. You know, it also makes me think about like what it always immediately comes up for me in these situations is I think the term is legacies, right?
Yes.
Like people who graduated there like years ago and can donate millions and millions of dollars so that future can show up at those universities. Are we going to talk about how like maybe they should stop doing that too?
Real talk.
And it's just like, you know, and then we had those, you know, those scandals from colleges with these celebrities who are paying millions of dollars to, you know, have their children get into their schools, but we can't take into consideration people's race and, you know, the history behind all that.
Yeah.
I think it's just like, it's really, it's just interesting. And, you know, I think the more that, you know, we listen, or at least whenever I watch news or read things about our politicians and the people who are in our government who are supposed to be advocating for us, you know, like the way that they play around with words is just like, oh, that is not what I like, you know, the interpretation of it, and they'll do anything to spin it. It's just like I'm still processing.
Yeah, it's really, this will be very fascinating to watch, Andre, because there are a couple of things that I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about, one, the future and the world we want to live in, especially connected to this speech. What's the future of this human rights, the civil rights movement, and what did the prophets of long ago say, aka Dr. King? So we'll get to that in a moment. So it makes me think about what future do we want for the country,
Right.
and if we are just everyone's walking around with a different future. And then it makes me think about this idea that just came to my head and lost it. It'll come back, but it was about like imagination. It'll come back. I'm sure I just lost my thought. I'm not shocked. I'm just like, wow, what that is. Oh, I know what the thought was. It's like when the Supreme Court laid down the law of the land for segregation, right? And it took the South almost 20 years to do it. They said absolutely not. Segregation now,
Right.
Segregation forever. So, I mean, it will be so interesting because there was a version of the world that they wanted to keep and protect, right? AKA the racial hierarchy, white supremacy. Like, affirmative action is one of those things. It's like, no, we're trying to change the world and create, more diverse public spaces. So I'm curious about if there will be another resistance to that. Like, yeah, y'all said that, but you know what?
Right.
You could say that, but in the same way that the racists didn't segregate for 20 years and then actually still didn't.
Right.
What is massive resistance going to look like to this ruling right now?
Right. And the last thing I'll say too is I'm just taking a look at it. Justice Sotomayor says in her little paragraph, she wrote, ignoring race, will not equalize a society that is racially unequal. What was true in the 1860s and again in 1954 is true today. Equality requires acknowledgement of inequality. And then Justice Ketanji Brown says that no one benefits from ignorance. Although formal race-linked legal barriers are gone, race still matters to the lived experiences of all Americans in innumerable ways, and today's ruling makes things worse, not better.
Yeah. And it's so interesting. It's like, and it matters because for, it seems like folks don't want to do the hard work, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
no, actually, if we, sometimes I just get so like sad because there was like a civil rights act of like 1875 that integrated public spaces. Like, had that work
Right.
happened in 1875, maybe this ruling would be more appropriate, right? It would have fit into the narrative of the growing public body, because the public body would have had more than 100 years of working together, living together, norming, figuring, blending, all of the things, right? But it's like, no,
Right.
that they overturned that in favor of states' rights. And then Jim Crow was the law of the South for 100 years. So it's like, yo, we just, at some point we have to say, oh, no, you know what? I think that's what this work is about. It's like, at some point it's, we are one body, we are one people, so let's do the healing work of coming together. And I think that's probably a nice segue into like summer school and this particular artifact. We are talking about the future of the civil rights movement. It's a speech that King gave. And just before we get started, I just want to talk about some of the ground rules. You see them on the poster, but this is really about dialogue, not a discussion. The goal is to connect thoughts, not agree on one idea or one thought, but practice listening to all the thoughts is the practice. Want to practice listening without prejudice, trying not to influence each other. And when we get to this notion of healing, want to observe and notice your body and its sensations. Observe your own thoughts and your feelings. This work is personal, private, and public. We want you to stay open to drop old ideas that no longer serve and myths, but breathe through the scary parts, because oftentimes when we are learning something new, scary parts emerge. Respect the silence when it comes. There's nothing empty about silence, but we want to make sure we respect it and we don't feel the need or the urgency to fill it in. Want to actually focus on coherence externally. Notice how if there are thoughts that you have are conflicting, and don't try to reconcile it or settle it, just notice. And then when we have people join the space, one of the ground rules we want to institute is this notion of protect and connect. Connect and call on community members using their preferred names, like their system names. Like, I'm the 228 Accelerator, Dre is 2024. Mm-hmm. If anyone else joins this community, they might have a name like Hefty Final or Saucy Boss. We want to ask that you call them by those names to protect the space, protect them, and also allow for authentic connection. So let's just jump into the quotes. There are a couple of quotes, Dre, that really, really resonated with me, and you might have seen them, but I want to start at this one. It's, the salvation of the Negro will mean the salvation of the white man, and the destruction of the life and of the ongoing progress of the Negro will be the destruction of the ongoing progress of the nation. I'll read that one more time. King says, the salvation of the Negro will mean the salvation of the white man, and the destruction of the life and the ongoing progress of the Negro will be the destruction of the ongoing progress of the nation. So I'm going to stop right there and just wonder, we have the ruling. What's coming up for you when you hear that quote?
Yeah, I often think about, as you were reading that, I often think about how there's another quotation that I think matches this, where it's fighting for your liberation is fighting for my liberation, we're fighting for all our liberation. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes when we think about, I think about movements in our country, and when we mobilize, organize, and work together, how much of that progress moves versus like doing it individually. Like, for example, I was at this event a couple weeks ago and it was for Juneteenth Pride Walk, and they were saying that Juneteenth and Pride, like, you can't have one without the other. Like, you can't just be like, oh, it's just Pride, oh, it's just Juneteenth. And the person who was leading it was like, let us remember that Juneteenth and Pride go hand in hand. Like, they're both, like, you can't have one without the other. And I was like, I haven't heard that in a while. Like, I often, when I go to a lot of these events, you only have one or the other.
Right.
And so for them to say that publicly in front of everybody that was there, it was very moving. It was a very moving speech for us to, like, think about, like, liberation for all people, and we're not just thinking about one group over the other, etc.
Yeah, it's like, when we had Juneteenth declared as a national holiday, was very excited, but it was like, it's Happy Freedom Day, freedom for all of us, right? And to not acknowledge both at the same time is also not to acknowledge the movements that happened at the margins and how they created spaces for all of us to be more free. Like, Pride would not have happened without the civil rights movement. It just wouldn't have happened. The women's movement wouldn't have happened without the civil rights movement. So it's like all of these are interconnected, and understood that, in the American story, in this version of it, race has been the marginalizing agent. It's just baffling to me. No, it's not baffling to me. I've been around here long enough. It's like, I'm not surprised. I wanted to be surprised.
Right.
but I'm not. It's like, it's the idea of us being one body, that we're interdependent, that we are connected. Sometimes it's hard for me to even understand, why is that so hard to understand? Why do you think?
Right. The other thing, you're asking me?
Well, yeah, and then, yeah.
Oh, okay. So what I was going to say that is, I think a lot of times, this is like about like me feeling threatened that that particularly white people are going to lose their power, their control in our country.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think about like the movements that keep going, and in our brains, right? It's like, duh. But then you think about like how much this country was entrenched on making sure that white people stay in power, particularly white men stay in power, and be able to control all the wealth and all the things in this country, that I think people fear that loss, and it's often the rhetoric that they use in that I often hear in media, where it talks about like, oh, they are taking our jobs, or they're causing all these problems. But to recognize that a lot of these issues go hand in hand and require all of us to solve and to work through is something I feel like we need to continue working on.
Yeah. What quotes or what sentiments in this speech, if you had a chance to look at it, resonated with you?
I did not get a chance to look at all of the speech, so if you have another quotation, I'm happy.
Oh, yeah, we do. There's another one. I pulled out 3, and I think it kind of leans very closely to what you just said. And especially like this hot topic of racism that no one really wants to talk about or acknowledge. And I tell you, like, this is the quote that when I read it, Andre, I have to tell you, I got a lump in my throat and a pit in my stomach, and I sat back for a minute because I had never, I don't know why I hadn't drawn the through line to this particular, clarifying point that King just so eloquently puts a pin in it. But I'll read it for you. He goes to say, "It is a myth of the superior and the inferior race. It is the false and tragic notion that one group, one particular race, is responsible for all of the progress all of the insights and the total flow of history and the theory that another group or another race is totally depraved, innately impure, and innately inferior. There's another part, but I'm going to stop there because I think that completely captures the hierarchy. When you hear it that way, what are your immediate reactions?
Yeah, so when I hear, you know, that one group isn't responsible for the what's that? What's the line? One group isn't responsible,
For
like,
all
for
the
the
progress, the insights, and the total flow.
yeah, and but it's interesting because when I think about like the building of our nation, like the country, it is pretty clear who was the one like really truly building, the nation,
Yeah.
or building the economic wealth of the country, or who was building the railroads, who was doing all the farming, who was. I think about that often in the story, particularly as a former history and ELA teacher. I often think about with students like what is the narrative around like who built this country, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like um, what kind of stories are being told around that. And so when I hear that, yes, to like there's definitely a lot. When we think about like the history of our country, there's so many different groups that have participated in the building of our nation. But then we have to think a little bit more critically about like who really was the one doing the work for that.
Yeah.
And I think that's what came up for me when I was listening to that.
Andre, I love to as I've gotten more mature, and I think been able to see some of my gifts more clearly. Like I like to write, but I've never necessarily, I don't know if I told you this, have been compelled to like write a book. But I was relaxing, and I was like, if there was a book that I would write, it would called Everyone Should Work Hard for Their High. And I tell you why. I was like, I called my dad. I was like, yo, people are racist because follow me for a second. People are racist because it feels good. If it didn't feel good, they wouldn't do it. And now why it's while it's the smaller part of the self and the lower ego and the basement and in the chakra spaces that like racism feels around fear, like if white folks and black folks and brown folks all work to build a country together, that's a different high, but that's working for it. You know what I'm saying? That's the high of healing and coming together. But I was like, no.
Right.
Like, if you exploit other people and if you exploit the land, then the high is destructive.
Right.
It's destructive to the private body and it's destructive to the public. And I think what we're seeing is, racism is destructive. Y'all don't see the destruction to your own bodies, but it's destructive.
Right.
And it's like, oh, you don't want to work with us.
Right.
I mean, and there's some white folks that are just like, we're down to build. But like when you have laws and decisions like this, it says, oh, you ain't trying to work with us.
And I think they come up in a lot of different ways. And so, as you're saying that, I think about like the district that I live in. And this is like along politics, right? Like red states, blue states, red districts, blue districts. And even though our county or where I'm from is a blue district, they vote Democrat pretty heavily. But I often think about things like what happens if they merged school districts. I'm from a predominantly Black and brown neighborhood, but literally we just crossed one street and it is one of the richest neighborhoods in the county that I'm in. And I often think about like, there is a subset of homes that are close to that high school or close to that middle school. Like, why don't they just like send some of our kids in our district to that school, because we don't get as much funding as those school districts. But I often think about this happened in Chicago. This happened in plenty places where when they do those merges, and well, let's be real, it's a race issue. How much the people who quote unquote voted Democrat or voted blue would push back against it.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want our kids at their schools. Because it will lower test scores, it will cause more violence, like all this negative rhetoric. And so that's what came up for me in terms of like, are we really working together or not? Like,
well,
yeah.
No, keep going. I'm sorry.
And I think that comes with fear.
Yes.
Like the part that I said earlier, it's like there's this fear, like I don't want to give up my power. I don't want to give up my, which I paid for those property taxes and school taxes and all those things. Like, why do they get to reap the benefits of what I paid for in this district example? And so, I mean, I hear that, and I'm bringing this in terms of education just because that's what I listen to a lot, and a lot of podcasts, School Colors, where they talk about like integration of schools or merging school districts. It always ends up like this, where they're arguing about, no, they can't come here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you said you found your quote that resonated and connected with you. Share it with us.
Yeah. So, and I've been thinking about this a lot. So, I remember this from having read this before. It says, and now in order to develop these massive action programs, we've got to get rid of one or two false notions that continue to exist in our society. One is the notion that only time can solve the problem of racial injustice. I'm sure you've heard this idea. It is the notion almost that is something in the very flow of time that will miraculously cure all evils. And I've heard this over and over again. And I kept looking for the word time because I feel like that is often what I hear about, is like, it's going to take time. Or, oh, it's just the notion of the time, or it's just the movement of the time. And it's like, I don't think we can wait anymore. Like, I feel like I think we talked about this before, about like the sense of urgency around doing these massive movements and doing these things. And I've talked about with you before, like I had to read this article for school on this idea called the tempered radical, or tempered radicalism, around the idea that small wins are good, and that in order to make change in a big organization or a big environment, you kind of have to move in a certain way versus like going straight cold. Sorry, you heard me like clap back. Then going straight cold, and I kind of disagree with the whole, because based on what this says right here, that time can solve the problem of racial injustice. I feel like tempered radicalism, or that idea, assumes that time is not a factor, and that you can just move as slow as you want, and we'll take small wins. But I just I'm at a phase where I feel like we can't have, like, small wins are great, but also we're still experiencing things that happened 50 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's so interesting when, like, I think that it's I mean, the whole idea thing about time, it makes me think about what the intention is, right? And it's like, if the intention is to heal the body, to heal the country, right? And there's definitely a need to do that with the level of suffering that's happening, the level of, I'm thinking about the quote that we talked about yesterday, like, the gunshots are people trying to live a little longer. But, you know, and it's like the level of suffering that's happening, people in pain, the earth crying out, like, air quality is back. And I don't know about where you are, but air quality here is low, is unhealthy again. It's like, we have all of the signals that we need an incredible healing. And if we don't do anything fundamentally different, we can pretty much predict what time is going to do. Just take what today looks like and just stretch it out longer. And
Right.
so it makes me think about like how that is, it's an excuse. It's like, yeah, time can be your friend when you activate quickly in the right direction and you continue to do the work, right? And what immediately came to mind when you were talking was like, whenever I'm practicing in the studio, they're like, activate, go. Like, time is not. I was like, oh, you're right. Because what are you waiting for? Go, move, do
Right.
something. And then time is your friend because you continually use it in your favor. It's just not. It's like not doing anything. It's doing something intentionally to heal, to come back together. And then time is not. Time is neutral. It's how you use it.
Right.
That I think that is important to acknowledge. There's another part that kind of gave me pause about the when King is discussing the racial hierarchy, and he goes on to say, and in the final analysis, race is evil, or racism is evil, because its ultimate logic is genocide. Hitler was a sick and tragic man who carried racism to its logical conclusion, and he ended up leading a nation to the point of killing about 6 million Jews. I will continue, I'll read that one more time. And in the final analysis, race is evil because its ultimate logic is genocide. Hitler was a sick and tragic man who carried racism to its logical conclusion, and he ended up leading a nation to the point of killing about 6 million Jews. Woo!
Mm.
That's a heavy one.
That is a heavy one. And the way, and I've thought about this before, and I definitely, have you been to the Holocaust Museum in DC?
Oh, yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I've been there so many times on field trips, and I often think, and what I think about is how one person's ideology convinced so many people that that was the ideology.
Yeah.
And then what you just said was the effect of all of that.
Right. Yeah. It's a.
I like to have a little bit, like and what scares me is that kind of rhetoric for different groups of people, and we can name all the groups of people that are being targeted nowadays, implicitly, explicitly, directly, indirectly. And it makes me nervous that, and to be honest, our last presidency made me think of that often. Like I felt very unsafe. I felt all of the things, but also I like to have sometimes I like to have a little optimism that I feel like that we're trying our best to make sure that that doesn't happen again. But I'm also aware that they're happening in small pockets.
Yeah. 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 I wonder how many people, think about engage in racist practices with the consciousness that they're complicit in genocide. I think culturally we don't make that our rhetoric doesn't make that leap.
No. I don't think people, I don't want to say I don't think people, I don't think that people are making that leap. Like, I think people think that's far-fetched, but it's not.
No.
Like I don't think people are making that connection that a lot of these, whether they're policies, ideologies, things that are happening, connect to the idea of genocide. But then I think when people hear that word, they're like, no way. And it's like, think a little deeper.
Yeah. 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 It is it's because I was like, absolutely. That's exactly what this does. And um because race and class are so very coupled, so it's to think about, um that's the impact of all of our action. Like that could be the impact of this decision. um and I know that's like they're like, oh, but we're trying to remove it. Again, I need to read the dissent, but we don't want race to be a factor, but it controls everything.
Right.
It controls
But
everything.
yeah. And I read another tweet earlier that all those things like may be true, right? Like those are the things that they put. Like, but what's going to happen is, and I think the book that you had me read before, the Miseducation of Horace Tate.
Mm-hmm.
Am I correct around like people are going to mobilize in different ways and make sure that um, those things that are geared towards equality or equity are still happening, right? Like, I hope people like start taking into consideration what people are writing about their experience, and even though that they can't directly do that based on the decision, I feel like there might be other ways, hopefully, that we can still address the issue.
Yeah. The final quote I want to bring up is around like this notion of reflect and act. And we can start to move to implications to practice. Hold on. We can start to move to implications to practice. I'm going to try if I can get this in focus. There we go.
It's the quote right in front of me.
Yeah, it's like, would you like to read it out for us with the beautiful humans
Sure.
from Paris is Burning?
Yes, so it says reflect and act. And I would be the first to say that if the race problem in America is to be solved, the white person must treat the Negro right. Not merely because the law says it, but because it's natural, because it's right, and because the Negro is his brother. And so I realize that if we are to have a truly integrated society, men and women will have to rise to the majestic heights of being obedient to the unenforceable.
What does that make you think? What comes up for you? And then we're going to move to implications to teacher practice.
And this is something I just reflect on a lot. Like, we love a good law, words and policies. Like, we love a good law here. Like, oh, it's kind of like that's what they love to use, is like, it's not in the Constitution. In the Constitution, it says this. But it's like, can we just be really great human beings to each other?
Right.
Like, and I'm thinking about this even from the context. So yeah, we're talking about like race, right? But like, I also think about this from like the gun violence problem that we have in our country.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the Constitution says everyone has the right to bear arms, but do we really need semi-automatic rifles?
No.
Like, do we really know? Like, it's like, do we really need that? And then it's just kind of like, the law said so. Yeah. And so I think about that, like, why can't we just be great human beings?
Yeah.
Why can't we just treat each other like the way that we want to be treated? And I'm not saying that we're all going to be perfect in that. And like, I think part of this process is also like trying to reflect around like what are the mindsets and biases that you have, call yourself in, and we need to like just be able to have these conversations, the conversation that we're having right now, with more people, and just like more people who are willing to participate in having these discussions, because like I said, like, not everything, like, we love a good law, and it's just like, okay, but that's just not nice.
Yeah, it's just
or
like
kind.
It's like, it's just not nice or kind. I don't care. It's like, you know, it gets me to this idea of like what it means to worship the written word and which written words we worship first, and
Mm,
then second, it's when a law is counterintuitive to being nice and kind, change the law, right? And it's like
right.
in understanding that also that laws are only reflective of where people's beliefs and their own I'm going to be very generous where they are in their own healing journey. um so you're right. It's like, slavery was legal, don't mean it was right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was legal to colonize other places doesn't mean it was the right thing to do.
Right. Right. Right.
And it just so it's baffling to me how easy it is to forget, like, to as my parents and my grandparents, to act like you don't have any sense. It's like, I don't care what the law says. Well, I do, but you know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's like people are dying,
Right.
not uncomfortable, dying. Kids are
Right.
suffering. So at what point do we say, like, maybe we need to reevaluate some things because there's blood on the dance floor?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm, 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 mm.
Right.
All right, let's talk about teacher practice, because I think we're entering this era. I think this decision is another bellwether of the era we are entering into. Um, this speech is still very relevant. Um, and what do you think has to be true for teachers to use this content either to develop themselves as, professionals, or even in the classroom? You recently have left the classroom, Andre. Talk to me when you think about
Yeah.
content like this, having it in schools, and the conditions that are required.
Yeah. So I think if we're talking about teachers and leaders, I think this is important content in order to, especially when we're working in communities that center the most marginalized, I think it's important that we read things like this to
Mm-hmm.
reground us in why we do this work, why this work is important, and why we need to continue doing the work that we're doing. At the same time, I think it's a good check for educators and educator leaders or organizations to think about, like, what are some practices in your classroom, in your school, in your organization that reflect things that were happening 50 years ago, or things that are not humane, things that are not nice, things that are not kind. And I don't like using nice and kind, but like things that are not um, promoting equity for all students. And I think that's like really important because some of the things that we see or that we've seen in the past are seeping into our schools and seeping into the mindsets of how we think about our students. So I think like this content is extremely important for educators and educational leaders. And then on the flip side, this content is extremely important for our students and our youth. They need to be exposed to this and think critically about how, Dr. King used this speech many, many years ago and how it's still relevant today,
Mm-hmm.
right now, and the second. And so I think it's really important that it's used broadly.
Yeah, it makes me wonder about this article that I read, and it talked about what happens when students who experience racism and classism, the impact of colonization, erasure, when they learn about when the racial hierarchy and all the power hierarchies are made visible. And one thing that the researcher noted was when there was no conversation about the power dynamics of society, the way we currently designed our society, students interpret their quality of life and their lack of having access to resources as their fault.
Mm.
Like it's something that they did, and that's the reason why they live in a neighborhood like they do, and that's the reason why their
Right.
parents can't, find high quality, high paying jobs. Like, the impact is internalized, and it's not balanced with, oh, there are other factors that are older than my parents are that are affecting our lives. And they said that once students had the hierarchies made visible to them, in you know, in a definitely an age appropriate way, they gained more agency over their lives.
Right.
And I think it's super. I mean, and I think that is, you know, one of the long term impacts of, you know, erasing the factor of race in college admissions, because the long term impact, it's like it's still a play on the power dynamics. You've just said you can't talk about this or this can't be a factor, but it's still at play. It's still shaping
Right.
everything up to that
Right.
child's up to that student's experience. So to say that the
Right.
very one of the very things that have shaped their entire journey can now no longer be used in, cannot be considered, is it's just it's just it's baffling. And then it's almost as if, like, I just read a quote that said, President Obama said it was never the whole answer. And it's like, we all know that affirmative action was never the whole answer, but it was a step in the right direction.
Right. 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 And in reflecting about what you just said, you know, when we're talking about like power dynamics too, like the people who voted no, like it's because their life experience is not ours.
Right.
Like they don't think it's necessary. And it's like, y'all had a different life experience. Like y'all were on a different side of the track.
Yeah.
And it's and that's the part that's still like, I'm not surprised, but it also just like, we're not even thinking about other people.
And maybe
we're
that
just
is
thinking about ourselves.
And that is then the point. Like, not even thinking about other people, or not even thinking about the people who are different from us as people.
Right.
Hmm.
I know we have one more minute, but I just wanted to bring what came up for me, and this always comes up for me when things like this happen, is I think about the pandemic when we first started. Like, who got the privilege to stay home?
Yes.
And who had to go back out there?
Right. Right.
And that to me, like, people are not, and even something that was really glaring is that, like, who was delivering your food to your house? Who was still at the grocery store? Who was your nurse? Who was the people still doing the everyday work that needs to make sure that our cities work, or our society works? It's just something as glaring as that. People can't make the connection.
Right. Right. Or
who got
who got to quarantine far away in the mountains or on a beach or in another country?
Yeah. Right.
And there are people of all races and storylines who got a chance to do that. But I think if we looked at the patterns, we would probably see some trends. So if you're watching this, thank you so much for joining this conversation. This is 228 Accelerator Summer School with the illustrious founder of House of Legends, Dre 2024. If you are watching this, invite others. If you are watching this and you enjoy the content, join us at summer school at exdcommunity.org. Next week, we will be talking about Women Speak Out Against Fascism. Check out the resource, read, connect, and share, and we will see you the next time. Thank y'all so much for joining.
All right.
All right. Yes. I'm going to stop the stream now, and then we can talk.
Okay.
Andre, what the hell?